Alright, my name is Joel Chittister. This is my senior capstone presentation. There's my ID. Hopefully you can see that. If not, there it is on the screen for you. Okay, so a description of my project. My initial idea for my project was to compile learning materials to help new nurses complete their competency certification. The concept of it kind of changed over time. I found that there was both too much information and also a lot of really good information that was already pretty easily accessible to new nurses, and I didn't really want to reinvent that. So what we decided to do was focus on competencies that were critical in nature but not frequently used, or if they were, maybe a little more frequently used ones that had very little margin of error. So that was what we focused on. My motivation for the project was based on the fact that it took me over a year to sign off on all my emergency department and medical surgical nursing competencies, but during that time, about 20% of the competencies took up most of that time. That other 80% were simple things we learn in school that we really don't need to be educated on too much. So addressing that 20% was important, both to me, to new nurses, but it was also a lot of those competencies were important to my facility, in that it's they were ones that are critical for us to maintain our trauma certification. So our hospital, you can see on here, is Sanpete Valley Hospital right there, and if you can see that map, you can see that there's a Payson all the way to Cedar City, without a trauma 4-level center, except for Sanpete. It's the only central rural Utah one. So we worked really hard to keep that certification, and so that is also a contributing motivation to this project. One of the things I wanted to accomplish in this project, aside from just compiling resources, was going to be to create something of my own, something that came from my own knowledge and my own experience. So we identified a few, or I, my mentor, and some of our providers and nurse coaches and new hires kind of brainstormed, and we came up with a couple of things that were maybe the top 3. And I chose those and created some flow sheets for those. Again, I did a lot of research on these and came up with a flow sheet of things that would help make sure those scenarios went successfully. One was for acute myocardial infarction, acute stroke, and conscious sedations. All 3 of those have pretty significant medications that you use, pretty low margins of error, where if you mess up, you can really cause harm. So I put these 3 slides in here. Those are my own creation. Those are things that I've included in the educational resource binder that I made for these critical care competencies. Some of the other competencies, aside from the heart attack, stroke, and conscious sedation, we did some for cardioversions, blood product administration, sepsis protocol, although that one, my organization already has really good, pretty available sepsis protocol documents, but we did include those in the binder as well. Some TPN, electrolyte replacement protocol, central lines and chest tubes. The last 2, we had our trauma surgeon gave a really good presentation, and he was nice enough to share that presentation, so that's included in my binder as well. So again, we have some flow sheets, charting helps, lists of required supplies, commonly used medications and dosages, and procedural requirements for all of those. So benefits for the organization, department, and unit, and for myself. For the organization, like I mentioned, we're a level 4 trauma center. We benefit by having competent nurses and in being able to provide that unique trauma care. We also, one of the measures of us as an organization is when we send a patient who's had a stroke or a level 1 trauma, heart attack, and we've done significant treatments and interventions on them, so that by the time they get to the destination facility, they're able to be cared for more effectively. If we screw up, it makes us look bad, it makes them look bad, it makes everybody look bad. So us being able to have these kinds of resources makes us competent, and it makes us able to provide care to these people in a way that benefits our hospital, our emergency department, as well as the organization as a whole. Within our emergency department, we do have being a rural county, we don't see a lot of the same thing. We see just lots of different scenarios. That said, we end up not being as familiar maybe with all of them. Being able to have a resource like this is like having a second nurse to kind of back us up. It's also good in terms of developing competency as a nurse, so that helps our department that way. And like most new nurses, I think at one time or another we've all felt ourselves scared out of our minds about a situation, really nervous, unsure of our decisions. And again, as for me as an individual, I like the idea of having something like this that's very readily accessible, and that's one of the things I discovered as I did this project. There are tons of good resources. They're just really buried under a mountain of information, and trying to find those resources in a rush is going to be difficult. So that's a benefit to me. So my mentor, or my preceptor, I should say, is somebody I've worked with for about 3 years. He graduated from Dixie with his bachelor's, has worked at Intermountain Medical Center, Dixie Regional Medical Center, and now my facility. He's worked on a lot of different units. He's been a nurse educator for quite a while, and is currently working on his nurse practitioner doctorate. So he's very knowledgeable. He's a very education oriented, and more than that, he's my friend, and I find him to be an honest and ethical person. So that's why I chose him. Again, he's also somebody that's very accessible to me, lives near me, so we've been able to meet very easily and discuss the project. One of the interesting things about him is he does not like my facility's competency pass-off process, because he feels like it spends a lot of time focusing on mundane tasks that most nurses don't have a problem with. And so it was kind of, as we discussed this project, that was one of the biggest things he input into it, was trying to get a focus on these more critical competencies. For my goals, it was to improve my own familiarity with the higher level skills, and to help others avoid bad patient outcomes by increasing their competency and response time in critical situations. provide resource that allows rural new grads to progress through the orientation process without delays and extensions, and to encourage mastery of advanced skills for all nurses and participate in training. One of my initial ideas for how I would evaluate this project was just going to be how fast a new nurse could progress through this competency certification process. That obviously wasn't going to be possible just given time. Most of our new hires would not finish that process till well after this class was over. So instead we we met with our providers, individual nurses. More importantly, we met with our nursing coaches and our new hires, several of which did some cross-training both with me and with others in our emergency department using these resources. We also surveyed them, asking them things like, were they helpful to you? Would you use them in training? Would you use them to pass off your competencies, and would you use them as a resource in scenarios where they were pertinent? And we got very good positive feedback on all of those. Two of our new hires specifically, I've been able to spend a fair amount of time with over the last couple weeks and even the last month, and both in discussing these things and in using them. And they were helpful. We had never had a stroke come through, a true stroke, but we did have some conscious sedations and some STEMIs that we were able to use these resources to meet our goals. The biggest issue I found myself was with this project was finding a more, making it fit a more specific need. That said, the project evolved into something that was both workable and beneficial. So I already work with my mentor on average 2 times a week, and then we were able to meet and talk about some of our ideas and modifications of the project outside of work. So we definitely had a lot of time to collaborate. He's like I said, he's a very smart guy, a very driven guy. So he had some really good suggestions, and I went with most of them. Weekly meetings with my preceptor were helpful in keeping me on schedule and for completion. I actually didn't complete it as soon as I wanted to, and I also didn't complete. We originally wanted to do emergency department, medical, surgical, and operating room competencies, but that was the scope of that pretty early on. Like I said, was a little out of reach, so we decided to reorganize and do a better focus. So for my evaluation, I was able to measure success of all my goals and more. I was able to evaluate my own progress and familiarity with critical care processes. New and experienced nurses expressed the ability to use the resources to pass off competency and expressed value in resources for individual practice. A binder with resources and flow sheets have helped the orientation pass off of new nurses, although obviously none of them will have made it all the way through that process, but at least for these skills. We will, just as a personal goal beyond this class, as I find newer and better resources, and also for these skills and for new ones, we'll be adding to that. It is something that just kind of hangs out in our emergency department. So one of the some of the identified benefits of this project to the organization and department and unit was, and more specifically to me, most organizations have surveys that they send out. We also have core measures, usually in in terms of time goals for doing interventions, and I found that my Common Core measures improved. My patient satisfaction scores over the last month have improved, and some of them wrote comments specifically naming me in relation to those interventions that were very complimentary, and so I think if nothing else, having compiled these resources improved my ability to provide good care, which reflects good on my unit and department. So one of the biggest benefits to me personally was the opportunity to train new nurses. That was not something I had planned on or was going to use in this capstone. One of the things, one of my when I was doing my RN license, my preceptor at that time always liked to say the best way to become a good nurse is to see, do, teach. That's something I was able to put into practice with this project. As stated earlier, I did spend a lot of time with at least two of our new hires, training and helping them through the competencies, specifically the ones that we used for this project. In summary, the project was a large success for me. It cemented in my eyes the importance of identifying valuable ways to increase knowledge with the input of my mentor, nursing staff, and healthcare teams. While completing an educational binder was helpful, the education and flow sheets were a success and beneficial. It was also a great learning experience in learning how to adapt to situations and change. I also found the leadership aspect appealing and will be more engaged in participating in committees for improvement at my workplace. And then just in summary, this is the just the binder we did. It's divided up into those 8 competencies that we identified. Some of this are my flow sheets. Some of it are just resources and presentations that I found cataloged in my organization's educational resources, and hopefully having them in that binder in a easy to find location will help with nurses both in practice and education.